Welcome to the Glassworking shop. Well, the pieces have come out very nice. Here's a picture of the core showing the little pointy points that were produced by squeezing, the happy accident that I referred to in the previous video. So now it's time to assemble the pieces. And this is a rather complex assembly working with some big glass. It also demonstrates how the squeezer can be used to make an array of divots in the sides of a round object, a cylindrical object, and then into those divots I can press some pre-made parts that I made in the earlier videos. So I've got a lot of prep done. I've got some punties with giant moils made. I've got my components preheating in the kiln, got the torch going, got the oxygen system going in the background, got the ventilation on, so hey, it's time to get to work. I always like to preheat my metal tongs a tiny bit. Cold out here in the hot shop in Northern California, and some of these tools can get pretty cold overnight, so I'm going to be grabbing the core. I've prepared a large moil on the end of this 19mm rod, which brings up an interesting comment that glassworkers who do handwork typically like to use smaller diameter handles because they're easier to spin. It fits a hand better. But when using the NQALHA, especially for a large assembly, kind of more convenient to use a large handle. And I've been getting used to using the 19mm, and then by putting a very large moil on it, it helps keep the thing stable, keep the thing under control, and more importantly, minimize the knuckle when it comes time to pull the thing, and that way I get a little bit more usable yield. So carefully taking the core out of the kiln, and then I'm a little more comfortable attaching by hand, so I'm going to heat the end of the core just barely, and then try to get the end of the moil, which has been kind of tapered and rounded, get that ripping hot. If I can get the thing on center, and it looks like I have got it more or less okay. I'll be able to fix it up later. So that is looking pretty good on center. So now I'm going to do a kind of an annealing flame out here. Even though the piece has been in the kiln, I really don't want it to explode. And so I'm going to use a very propane-rich annealing flame to start out, and then just gently bring it up to temperature. And while I'm doing that, I'm looking over at my multi-monitor screen. I've upgraded my video system quite substantially, and using a Blackmagic Design ATEM Pro ISO video switcher and recorder seems to make the process a tiny bit easier, more reliable, although I'm still having occasional problems with my wireless microphones. I think as I did some research, I discovered that I'm using rechargeable nickel metal hydride batteries, and the discharge curves of these batteries are very different from the discharge curves of alkaline batteries, and so that means that the charge indicator on the wireless transmitter is not accurate, which can cause an enormous amount of trouble. So while I'm very gently preheating this part, I want to show you the squeezer arrangement with these 6 kind of pointy dies. So those will push a divot, or actually 6 divots, okay, I believe that my piece is nicely preheated. And going to be striping 2 additional layers onto the surface. I'm going to be starting out with, let's see, what is this? North Star Lava, followed by North Star Cherry. And as usual, I'm going to let it stabilize and rest for a moment. Make sure that the core is not too soft, because I don't want to push divots into it with my color rod. The divots come later with the squeezer. So once again, striping with the hand torch using a very small oxidizing flame, preheating the rod a little. This color is a reasonably sensitive color. It's not the most sensitive, but it definitely is sensitive. And I have to always be on the alert for overheating, boiling, degradation. So just heat, the majority of the heat is going on the rod. A little bit of the side spill is keeping the substrate warm. I'm trying to feel the glass as it becomes kind of liquefied, not quite liquefied, but as it softens to striping temperature, being aware of how it feels as I'm striping it, and trying really hard to not use too much pressure. Also being very aware of overheating the rod, moving the torch around sometimes if I see the beginnings of evidence of overheating. And just trying to slowly lay down the most uniform stripe that I possibly can. Not really caring too much about clearing up the nubbins on the end. Although maybe someday that's something I should practice, because the really, really good marine makers that I've seen get super clean ends, and even after watching them, I still don't know how they do it. And that brings up a point that I think I've discussed before, but probably bears repeating, and that is that the inexperienced glassworker can watch a master over and over and over again and not understand what's going on. It takes a certain amount of skill, experience, insight, and a bunch of other magic to really be able to understand what it is, because an awful lot of glasswork is extremely subtle, and the difference of a fraction of an inch, a fraction of a second, a tiny difference in torch setup, or all the other factors that are involved in glasswork can make the difference between a practiced expert move and an inexperienced glassworker who said, "I did exactly the same thing as I saw the expert do. Why didn't it work for me?" Definitely something that I observed in my journey to becoming a glassworker, that when I first started watching glassworking videos, they made it look easy. It looked like magic. And I missed about 90% of what they were doing. I was unaware that the details even existed. I saw the 10% of the obvious part. And then little bit by little bit, as I developed skills, I was able to look back and go, "Oh, now I see what the guy is doing. Ooh, that's interesting." So just continuing to stripe here. And I know I've made this comment multiple times, but it does, since I'm just doing some fairly boring work here, it does bear repeating to just talk about, why do I make these videos? Well, a number of reasons. Probably the most practical reason is I sell glassworking machines, and by demonstrating how they're used, I can answer some questions for potential buyers about, hey, what's this thing useful for? Now, I do also realize that even though I'm getting better, every time I do it I get better, I'm not a master. And all the masters I know will claim I'm not a master. Probably the only people that actually claim to be masters are liars. But I show what I know. And for someone who knows more than me, watching me work may be humorous. For those who know less, hopefully maybe you'll learn something, because every skill level, there's always somebody who knows more, somebody who knows less, and for those who don't know everything that I know, you can learn something by watching me. And then on top of that, it's just fun to make videos. I just like it. Just a fun thing to do. So I'm knocking down some nubbins, keeping in mind that the moil end is always the troublesome end. It's those little tails have acute angles. if there's going to be trouble, it's going to be trouble on that end, especially since that end is getting cold while I'm working. So first thing I do after striping is to make sure the moil end is hot and happy. Of course, I don't want to overheat it because it is also the unstable end when doing work with a single-sided lathe. Now, as I've said before, melting in these rods, I have to be really, really careful because this is a sensitive color. I'm using an oxidizing flame, a small flame, and working in the back of the flame, which I've read this in online discussions and also been taught this by my teachers, and I think it's actually in the North Star user guide for the color as well, so it gives even more reason to believe that it's a valid strategy. Reversing direction on the NQALHA to control twist. And like I said before, this pattern is not ultra critical. If it twisted a little, nobody would ever know, but I just like to practice making pieces as twist-free as I possibly can. So I'm going to put that rod in the rod area. Now that it's starting to get droopy, switch to handwork. Get the mag flame going. I'm seeing a couple of tiny little bubbles that may be minor evidence of boiling. Might be trapped air, but always on the lookout, always aware. And then another thing, I think I said this in one of the earlier videos, that an awful lot of my work is repetitive. An awful lot of my work is fairly boring. And for those who are just watching for entertainment, I don't know, maybe it's not that entertaining. A lot of glassworkers who want to concentrate on entertainment often speed up the work because, or speed up the video, I should say. The work goes at the speed the work goes. Glassworking is slow, just a slow process, especially when you're trying to be oh so careful to avoid overheating, boiling, degradation, and trying to gently soak heat into the core, gently melt down the surface. So I do my videos in real time, and for those of you that just want to get entertained, well, sorry. For those who are trying to learn glassworking, learning timing is a very important part. Very early on in my glassworking adventure, I asked my teacher to review a video that I found and help me understand what the glassworker was doing. And his first observation is, dude, that's sped up and edited. Gave me a whole new insight, because a lot of learning glasswork is about learning the speed, the actual speed at which things occur. So this guy is just about very, very close now to being ready for the next color, which will be North Star Cherry, which is even more sensitive. And of course, if I was doing the design based on color sensitivity, I would never choose cherry as my outer color. But I'm doing the design because I think it will look cool. So I'm going to make sure that I get plenty of heat into my moil. Stop the NQALHA, let it droop back on center. And just knock down some of those annoying little nubbins. Return to striping position. Get all my stuff ready. I try to keep a minimum number of tools and glass on my bench. Most of the tools go in the right-hand side tool rack, and only a few of the things that are really frequently and commonly in use, I think that's ready for striping, end up on the bench. I do not want to work on a horizontal trash can. Now, this color, the North Star Cherry, is even more sensitive, so I have to kind of be careful about it. Moving the torch around, preheating the rod, being on the alert for signs of bubbling. Every time I think I see a bubble starting to form, I move the torch out of the way a little bit. Get some preheat going into that rod, once again using a very, very small flame, cold flame, but a wide flame. And the intention is to be able to get some preheat on the rod in order to kind of like gently start the melting process. A smaller flame, a more concentrated flame, would have to be moved more vigorously to accomplish the preheat. And the only downside of using the Mirage hand torch is that it's a little on the heavy side. And I've actually been thinking about possibly building some sort of a sling or other kind of a torch holding thingy that would relieve some of the weight from my arm, but that's the life of an inventor. Whenever there's a problem, think of an idea to invent. And who knows, it may or may not work, it may or may not be a good idea, I may or may not do it, but that's how the mind of an inventor works. And speaking of invention, I've been told that rotating the color rod while striping is a better approach, and I've never learned or practiced that by hand. I was taught just to use a non-rotating rod, but then I've seen other marine makers who rotate the rod, and at the moment I don't have the hand skill developed to do that. But of course I'm thinking, what if I just make a machine to do it? What if I just make a rod holder with a built-in motor? I mean, I'm using a rod holder anyway. What if I just put a motor on it? Who knows? Maybe someday. This is the, I don't even remember, third or fourth time that I've made a pattern similar to this. The last one I made came out really nice. It's one of my nicer pieces. And so I'm keeping the same basic philosophy in this pattern, adding a tiny bit of complexity. I'm going to do a little bit different color palette. I attempted to make a CAD drawing to be able to visualize very, very roughly and crudely visualize how the colors will go together. I'm going to use a similar, maybe not identical, but a similar design for the machined parts of the sculpture, and maybe use a wood base this time instead of the marble base. But who knows? I'll make the decision when it's time to make the decision. And yes, I do plan to document the entire process, which includes the hot work, the cold work, the machining, and then analysis and commentary where I review the process and just talk about what went right, what went wrong, what would I do different next time. We should have got the rod holder. It's getting pretty hot. The hot rod. Okay. So returning to rotation mode on the NQALHA. I'm gonna put away the rod holder. Get these rod stubs out of the way. They're still kind of hot. Concentrate the heat on the moil end because it's been getting cold. and I don't want it to crack. I've been trying to use the underhanded paddle technique to avoid burning up my paddle, but I also find that I like the visibility of doing the overhand technique. So we'll see. Probably as I practice the underhand technique, it's going to continue to get better. I'm looking over at my control panel, my video control panel, to make sure all is well. This process would be a lot easier if I had a camera operator, but hey, one-man shop. Got to do it all on my own. Got to be careful with the paddle too, because every time I touch it with the paddle, I'm sucking heat out of it. Cold oxidizing flame out in the far flame. Slow as it goes. Once again, as I've said many, many times, and will probably say many more times, one of the nice things about the NQALHA is it makes it easier to go slow. At least it does for me. I sometimes find that when doing handwork, it's hard to do it slow. I get impatient. My hand starts getting tired. Of course, as I'm doing this, every time I touch the surface with the paddle, I'm cooling the surface but not affecting the core heat. So while I'm smoothing the surface, I'm also building core heat, which is going to be important for the next step. And the step after that, which will of course be pulling. Now, this one is not going to be pulled down to a small size. I'm starting to get into the habit of making larger scale murrine slices. My latest one was almost 5 inches across. And in order to do that, my individual pieces of glass, my individual hexagons that are fused together, need to be a bit on the large side. So when I pull this, I'm not going to really pull it into cane. I'm going to pull it to ever so slightly smaller than it is after assembly. Yeah, it's getting pretty close. Getting pretty smooth. Seeing a slight amount of surface glow that may or may not indicate boiling and degradation. It's always a concern when doing work like this. So using the mag flame, getting some heat into the core, trying to judge when it's time to squeeze based on how much it's drooping. Need to concentrate on the ends because the squeezing process tends to accentuate the center when the ends are cold. And so by preferentially heating the ends, I can maybe possibly help the squeezing a little bit, help it be a little more uniform. But as I've said in other videos, when I first invented the squeezer, I assumed it would make it easy. Just put it in the machine, it'll work perfectly. And well, no, it doesn't. The machine does what the machine does. The glass does what the glass does. You have to have skill to know how to manage it. So here comes first squeeze. And yes, I can tell by the way it feels that it was at a good temperature. Here's the result after first squeeze. And I was able to more effectively manage the center bulge by preferentially heating the ends. So little bit by little bit, I'm learning to use my tool. Better remember to keep my moil hot. That was one of those, in the process of learning glassworking, when I would watch the furnace workers in the hot shop doing soft glass, I always wondered, why do you guys spend so much time with the torch on the moil? Then I had some moils fail and I understood. Standing on the squeezer, yes, this one is more under control than the previous one was. It's more constant size. It has a bit of a less bulge in the center, which always occurs, or at least always has occurred with me on the squeezer. I'm not planning on putting giant divots into this thing. The rods that I prepared in the first few videos were pulled to approximately 0.3 inches in diameter. So I'm not planning on getting too extremely aggressive with my divots. Yeah, that looks about right. So it's kind of like a screwdriver handle. And now comes the fun part. Going to be using the auxiliary heat shield for the NQALHA as I do hot assembly on the NQALHA. Also, going to have Mr. Bunsen at the ready